So how can I tell if my child's autistic? Before I say anything, please know if you want to know for sure if your child's autistic, go get a professional opinion. These are some really good red flags and tips though that we've experienced in our family. And at the end of the video, I'll share some differences we see between boys and girls that are on the spectrum. A couple of behaviors really early on are no social smile or little to no eye contact. These things go hand in hand. And a lot of times people will say, oh, they have a smile, they smile all the time. But I'm going to clarify what is a non-social smile with a social smile. So if your child is watching TV and they smile because something funny happens on screen, that's not a social smile. Or if you're tickling them and they smile, that's actually technically not a social smile either. Most likely they're smiling because of the physical sensation that they're getting of being tickled. So a social smile would be if they're looking at you face to face, you smile and they smile back. Another red flag is not responding to their name. Now my child did this for a little while, but then he completely stopped. So even though I knew he wasn't upset with me, I knew it wasn't defiant behavior, he would not turn around when I said his name. Or he wouldn't look up and look at me when I said his name. Another red flag for toddlers is if they have a hard time speaking or they just don't speak. Now, just because your toddler doesn't speak does not mean they're autistic. This is just one of the red flags. So if you start checking all of these, then they might be autistic. Another red flag is when they stop a skill that they've already learned. For example, if they babble and then they just stop, or they do respond to their name and then they just stop. Another thing that autistic children may do is called echolalia. I don't know who named that, but if I was naming a diagnosis that had to do with a speech issue, I would make it easier to say. It's when they repeat words and phrases even while you're trying to converse with them. One behavior that can be characterized as autistic is called stereotypy. Stereotypy. Another word I wish I could rename. It's a self-stimulation of one or more senses through persistent repetitive actions. And this can be shown in many different ways. It could be moving your hands in front of your eyes to see the light a certain way, or repetitive rocking back and forth, flapping hands. When someone's autistic, they experience the world in a different way and they regulate their body to help them feel more comfortable and more at ease. We all do that in little ways, don't we? My son Ezra will rock back and forth. He'll flap his hands, he'll throw things, and he'll even move his arms in a throwing motion when there's nothing in his hands. He'll scare me a lot of the times when I'm like, don't throw that. Oh, there's nothing in his hand, never mind. This can be called self-stimulatory behavior or just stimming. This type of repetitive behavior is very common for autistic children. And if you think about it, don't we all kind of rock back and forth or swing our leg back and forth while we sit? I wish people would just realize it's not that big of a deal. Another behavior that is really common is always being on their tiptoes. Our youngest does this all the time. But there's many reasons why a child might be standing on their tiptoes. It's always a good idea to have your doctor or physical therapist check that range of motion in your child's heel and continually check up on that. Another behavior is that sometimes autistic toddlers have a hard time looking at the camera when it's time to smile and take a picture. I've heard this story about 1,000,000 times. When parents say the first time they noticed that something was a little different about their child was during a photo family shoot and they couldn't get their child to look at the camera. One tradition that we have in our family is that when I have a child that's 6 months old, I try to get some formal photos of them. I remember when I tried to get Ezra to look at the camera when he was 6 months old. It was impossible. It was so difficult to get him to even look in a certain direction and smile long enough for me to take the picture. Even after an hour of trying everything I could think of to get him to stay still and smile for the camera, I never got a good picture of him. Another behavior is called elopement, and it has nothing to do with running off and getting married. Elopement is when a child runs off not knowing where they're going and without realizing or processing danger. My son Ezra will do this any chance he gets. He will run away as soon as he can, and he runs fast. And because we know this about our son Ezra, we decided to do a little experiment one time to see where he would go, just in case he ever escaped out of the house and we had to look for him. I remember when we opened the door and just let him run in our backyard. He started going and then kept on going. It was about 2 hours of my husband following Ezra to see where he would go, and Ezra didn't look back once. So elopement can be a really big concern for some parents. It's something that we deal with on the daily. And despite our best efforts as parents, Ezra has actually escaped a couple times. And there were some of the scariest moments of my life, not knowing where he was. But thankfully, we've had kind neighbors that have brought him back. I remember one time I thought he was asleep in his room, and we had a knock at the door. I opened the door, and Ezra was there with our neighbor. I had no idea he had even escaped. It was, of course, embarrassing and worrisome, but I want to share that with you because even parents with the best intentions who are trying their hardest, that happens to them too. And we appreciate so much the people that are around us that are unjudgmental and are just kind and helpful. Now keep in mind, every child on the spectrum is going to be different. The thing that's crazy about autism is the spectrum is so broad that even though we have one child on the spectrum, our next child, we thought, no way, he's not autistic because he's so different than him. Well, he's 2 years old now and he has speech delay and he really doesn't talk. He doesn't even say mama. He will stim often. He'll run around in circles, he'll move his hands, and he's always on his tiptoes. He self-soothes himself in a very interesting way. He'll actually hold onto his hair and go like this, and he'll feel the hair over and over and over again, and then it will help him relax. So we've noticed these little odd behaviors, and now we're actually in the process of getting him tested to see if he's autistic as well. Now he's already 2 years old, and so we didn't see the signs as early as we did with our other son, Ezra. And we don't know yet if our youngest son is autistic, but since he shows 3 of these major signs, we're gonna get him tested to find out. Now if your child's older, then the symptoms and the red flags might look a little different. Some autistic children have difficulty when their rigid schedule doesn't go as planned, and some truly need structure. If my son, Ezra, doesn't have certain toys that he can fidget with his hands, it's close to impossible to get him to focus on something else, especially if he's seen his toys somewhere in the house. He has to have that certain thing. Some autistic children don't understand idioms or have a hard time understanding idioms. If you don't know what an idiom is, here's some examples. It's raining cats and dogs. Make sure to keep tabs on your sister. And I am so sick and tired of you saying that. Those are idioms, which means if you take them literally, they make no sense whatsoever, which honestly, I don't even know why we say them. Another interesting thing that autistic children will do is they can become hyper-focused on certain interests. This is called perseverative interests. For example, I know this kid and he'll come up to me and he'll talk to me about Star Wars forever. But if I ask him about his favorite color, he'll look at his shoes. But he'll have lots to say about Star Wars. And this is another great example of trying to enter their world. When I ask him a question about Star Wars that shows that I know about the people and the plot lines, then I've entered his world and he is my friend. Now I'd like to share with you some differences between girls and boys on the spectrum. Many autistic girls are diagnosed when they're older, and these are some of the reasons why. Because girls, most of the time, are more socially aware. A little girl might notice right away that when she stims, it's embarrassing and people react, so she might hold off and try to suppress those autistic traits. Some important things to be aware of are autistic girls are statistically more likely to suffer from anxiety and depression. Girls are less likely to be as aggressive as boys and more likely to be introverted and withdrawn. And because of this, some autistic traits can be overlooked. If you have a girl who comes close to the autism criteria while she's young, it is common to have a reevaluation in her teens if you feel that that's something that she can benefit from. Now, if you've noticed that many of the things that I've listed really describe your child, there's nothing wrong with going to your doctor and saying, hey, these are some concerns I have. What do you think about getting my child tested because they might be autistic? Choosing whether or not to get a diagnosis for your child is a personal decision and can affect your child in many ways. A diagnosis can label a child and make them think differently about themselves. But also, a diagnosis can open doors of healing and introduce you to a supportive group of understanding people who are also autistic. Whether you decide to get a diagnosis or not know that we're here for you at Raw and Real Autism Mom. Now, this is not a full list. I know that I'm missing some, so put in the comments what are some other red flags that I missed. If you'd like to hear more detail or have questions about any of the things that I mentioned, put it in the comments and let me know, and I'll be sure to address those either in a future video or a live stream. The video on the right is an autism playlist where you can meet our son Ezra and our family travel vlog. The video on the left is 5 things you need to know before your child gets tested for autism. Remember, if you have an autistic child, you're in good company.